Hello everyone, welcome to another quick weekend video. There was a request online, I don't recall whether it was Instagram or here on YouTube, for a sketchbook tour. And honestly, I don't really have a working sketchbook right now that's sort of everything in one book that's been ongoing that I could just open up and show you. What I do have are sort of my past Inktober sketches that I put out in a couple of sketchbooks. So since they're all my sketches and they're effectively in a book, I guess you could call it a sketchbook. So that's what I have here. So this was my first one. It came out a while ago now. I had put this out for a little workshop I was doing in Taiwan, and it was just a giveaway. This one's mostly a collection of mechs, almost the entire book. And it runs through a bunch of different techniques, but mostly all traditional media. There are a couple of digital pieces like this one. This one starts out with using custom brushes. You can see there's a repeating brush shape right there. And so it's a technique where you turn up the stepping on a brush and then you just do a stroke and you'll get the stepping starts to look like these ribs or something. And so that's how a lot of these shapes were made, was first with just one brush, and then you just go and it set up this, so you can see there's the brush untouched there, repeating. So you just turn up the spacing on your brush control, and you can get the bigger gaps or smaller gaps, whatever you like. Here's another one. And then the next thing I would do is take that brush stroke on a separate layer and then warp it. And so here you can see that this has been warped. This might have been the shape of the brush, but also could have just done a warp to taper it and then get it to wrap across the shapes. And then you start coming back over the top and you do a little paint over. And so I'm just using the brush stroke to give me a sort of break me out of my muscle memory of the typical shapes I might draw by hand, and to inspire starting the sketch. So you can see that then I start to paint back over a little bit. Still very loose, didn't do much on that one as far as finish work. These are all traditional media. Marker first, a little bit darker here, I think because my light marker had run out and I was traveling, so I went to the next darker. And then probably looks like high-tech C back over the top. That's a brush pen with a little bit of marker. I think I actually painted this one for my YouTube channel way long time ago. So you'll see some of these are older. Actually, everything in this book is older. I don't even know when it was put together, honestly. It's probably at least 5 years ago. So some of these I would imagine I've already been through a sketchbook tour when they used to live in my sketchbook. So maybe I'll move to the newer book. But this one's kind of full of mostly mech sketches, like I said. So the first looks like 35, 36 pages are mech sketches. Oh, this is a fun one. Let's pause here for a minute. This is a ballpoint pen sketch, done obviously traditionally, that was scanned, dropped into Photoshop, and then the cutout filter was used to abstract that sketch into this piece. And the cutout filter allows you to set the number of values you want to have, and it also allows for some abstraction. It doesn't tend to work great with line only. It tends to fill in some things that maybe you didn't want to have value or be just a silhouette or opaque there. I tend to think it works better with a sketch like this, for instance, that has sort of solid value and some nice darks. The line tends to confuse it a little bit, but regardless, you can imagine that you could take this and put it on multiply and put it back over the top of that and have some interesting happy accidents as a result of this abstraction of the sketch. So I use the cutout filter quite a bit when looking for happy accidents and trying to create abstraction. Let's move into the other one. Got a couple of little hot rods back here. but primarily mechs in this little sketchbook. Some more things with wheels at the back. Alright, let's move into the next. This one, the other one's out of print, the orange cover. The blue cover was the second one in the series, but this is more of an official book. This is done, looks like 4 years ago, almost. Right. There are, throughout this book, this little sketchbook, there are these YT and GR little play buttons. That means that there's a related video, either on YouTube or Gumroad, to the sketches. So if you have this book, you know that. This one's a bit more of a mix, but a lot of things with wheels in this one. Primarily, again, the work was the sketch work that I did for the Inktober exercises, which I think are great. Maybe this year I'll get back to it. This car, in fact, was modeled by Sandy McPherson. He built a beautiful model of this hot rod, and you can find renderings of that, I think, on my Instagram. There's the little YouTubes. That one must exist on my YouTube channel, that sketch. Again, a variety of materials. We've got media used, marker, light marker first, high-tech pen second. This looks like high-tech. This is ballpoint over the top of a light marker sketch. You know, when you're drawing, you have a tendency, at least I have a tendency, to add more things to make the drawing look interesting that I probably wouldn't put there if it was a rendering. And what I mean by that is that once you make it a rendering, you have all these reflections and light and shadow. All of those elements can add more visual interest. Versus a line drawing, a lot of times, if you don't have value and you just have a sketch like this, the tendency will be to add more cut lines and things to make the drawing itself look interesting. But when you go and render them, a lot of times you delete that stuff. So that's just a little fun side note. This is a fun technique. This is sketching on vellum. And you can see, you might be able to see on the camera here a little bit, there's a little bit of what looks like a watercolor effect. And that's sketching on both sides of the vellum and letting it puddle up a little bit, and then using the ink line back on top just on one side, the front side. And then the orange here is, I believe, gouache put on top after the fact. It's the same with all of these, actually. This is not marker put on top, because the marker wouldn't cover the lines, and I wanted it to be opaque and cover some of the line work and the values, so I just came back with a little bit of orange gouache and hit some of these sketches. Same goes for this page. I think there's a lot that you can do in just a simple side view, especially with vehicles, to nail your proportion and stance and graphics before you worry about doing any surfacing or detailing, or even flipping it into perspective. Motorcycles tend to be quite two-dimensional anyway. I mean, there's a lot happening up here, but this is just mirrored to the other side. And I think you can get a bulk of the work done here before you decide, hey, should I even bother drawing this in perspective? These have a little bit of perspective, but not enough to really worry about. They're essentially just basic side views. But you can investigate, find a lot of things. Like, I do not like this bike at all, but that's part of the test, of course. That's why we sketch, is to eliminate the bad ones as much as it is to find the good ones. These are, again, light marker, looks like ballpoint over the top. Here's a more finished line drawing. I believe this is an overlay of this sketch. That's the first sketch, again with light marker and ballpoint. And then this, I blew it up a little bit and did a nicer, tighter line drawing in ballpoint with the interest or the thought that I would do a rendering of this one. I never really did a rendering of that one. Sort of gave up on it before I finished the rendering. This is the original, which is vellum. You can tell it's kind of puddly here in the way the marker pools up, with some pen over the top, looks like high tech, and then a quick scan, and then I just started rendering in Photoshop this area right around the center here, and a little bit on the seat, but you can see this part up here is untouched. Actually, I like this look a little bit where you retain the sketch from underneath and then just start to refine on top. That's usually how I start, actually. I let a lot of the sketch show through. Yeah, more ballpoint pen sketches. This is a Canson paper, so a little bit of toned paper. Didn't come back and put on any white pencil or gouache or anything, so it's really just the exact same technique as none of these, but with light marker first, and then darkened up just some graphic material areas, not really shading in relationship to where the light's coming from, just that, oh, this hood element here is dark, and the pillar's dark, and the helmet's dark, the side of the end plate for the rear wing, the tires, that sort of thing. Another one on toned paper. Yeah, it looks like a little bit of white came back in there, but not much. Very minimal. So another way I like to do these is to keep them as efficient as possible by only darkening the smallest areas. And so what I mean by that is that if I was going to light this, I wouldn't put the light from the right-hand side behind the vehicle, because that means all of this would drop into shadow, and that would be a lot of marker to apply, versus simple top lighting, or lighting it from the top and a little bit from this side. It means this is the only shadow side, which are sort of this and this, and a little bit of a soft shadow from this overlapping this element, and when the sides turn down as well. So in this case, this was the more efficient way for me to light it, where I could use more of the white of the paper and do a lot less shading. Same with this one, even though it's very subtle, it's not really rendered, but you'll see there's a little bit of a cast shadow in there. That's just to set the depth. It's a very, very light marker. And then this is my preferred shadow side, because again, it's small and efficient, and that would be fast. So just like boom, boom, set the overlap, get it to roll under here, shadow on the ground, and then hit the front. And then the big bulk of the drawing is left essentially white of the paper. These are challenging yet fun exercises to do, and you get very questionable engineering with my rear wing attached to the wheel upright. Aside from that fantasy element, these are like little puzzles. And what I mean by that is that you start with a light marker, but I'm using, in this case was a Copic pen that has the felt tip on it. I don't have one here right in front of me. Anyway, they're very unforgiving. So you get what you get. And once you start with a line, you've got to sort of continue it until it runs its course, and you have to figure out how to stop it, of course. But this is a lot like I was doing on the mechs, where you start and you have to try and work out the graphics as you're drawing, because there's no light pen stroke at all to make any discovery. And what I find in that exercise is that it forces you to pre-visualize the line before you put it on the paper. And then when you do put it on the paper, you're always trying to make lines relate back to that initial line that you dropped on the page. So they are a little bit tricky, a little stressful to do, but they really hone your skills in pre-visualizing the strokes and the marks before you commit them to the page. I believe that is this sketch that was scanned, and then I put it on multiply on top of this yellow photo texture, and then started painting. So really just pushing in and out with the values to start to make things go bump, right? So cast shadows, highlights, core shadows, reflected light, all those good things that we know how to do to make things look three-dimensional. Did these on Halloween, so some pumpkin things with wheels, some random sketch pages, all ballpoint. These look like a felt tip of some sort. Just a random sketch page. I think this is pretty much straight out of my sketchbook at that time, or poor planning and running out of the page, but really I probably started the sketch just here with this side with no intention of doing a whole sketch, just trying to visualize what does this side view look like in a 3/4 view. Marker ballpoint, these are some sort of felt tip. These are sofa sketches, so sitting on the sofa doing some random proportion side views. These are really fun to do because the perspective is generally simple. You just offset your wheels, maybe show a little bit. There's really nothing else to do here except offset the wheels. Honestly, if your VP is right through here, this is cockpit and windshield, kind of a dead side view. But they're really fun because you can do them quick and you can just explore proportions, I think, in the most easily done way. And so pushing more extreme, right, with a smaller driver, change wheel size, wheelbase, all of those things very, very quickly. Here's a sketch. This one's interesting because I struggle with this 2 wheels up front package and finding the right view for this that doesn't look wrong when you first look at it. And what I mean by that is that since we're used to seeing open wheel vehicles that have 2 wheels up front, when I first look at this, my brain wants to think it's a different view because this is uncommon to see 4 wheels up front and 2 in the rear. So I haven't explored really what's the best view for that. I don't have my favorite view yet, but I do struggle with trying to find the view when you do these irregular combinations of wheels. It can get a bit more challenging. This one you can see there's a bit more pushed perspective on it, and what I mean by that is we're a little bit closer to the vehicle and it's a shorter lens, and I can tell by the offset is quite large between the far side wheels and the near side wheels. So here we've got this offset here and an offset there, looks quite large. And so what I have to do when I do that is set, okay, well, probably here to here is the width. That means the cabin is supposed to be between these wheels, so it must be something less than this offset for the front wheels. And so once you set your offset, then you start to use that relative width as a guide for the width you put up here in the cabin. And then keep in mind, as you're getting closer to a vanishing point, which is probably somewhere right about in here, then you have to let this offset get thinner, 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 thinner to where your VP would be, and then growing, 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 growing to the back. So really, the only thing I had to do here were wheels offset, pillar offset, and underside of the far pillar, because we were pretty close, and it looks to me like the horizon line is right at the tops of the tires. And that means this far side pillar on the angle, I would see the underside of it. There is no roof to see, a roof panel, it's just glass. So that part's relatively easy. These are, again, sort of sofa sketches, loose, pushing with a little bit of light marker after the fact. So these start as pen only, at least that one did. This looks like it was a light marker first, then pen second, but these are all felt tip. And there's one that's felt tip first, probably, and then some marker applied for pulling out the graphic shapes and a little bit of shadow, but you can see that it's very loose proportionally. The challenge when you do a sketch like this is the desire and tendency to want to correct the lines by adding more ink. So what I mean by that is that these lines are really wiggly in the ellipses, but I didn't grab a circle guide or an ellipse guide to fix them. I just left them alone, left them minimal. Had I gone in and made them darker to try in my mind correct the shapes and make them more precise, all I would do is pull more attention to that rear wheel and make it very, very high contrast and pull people's attention to that area. So there's an element of discipline that you can put into the forefront of your mind while you're sketching these sorts of sketches, is to not worry about the lines being wiggly, really worry about the contrast and controlling the line weight on where you want people to look. And so that's a tricky thing to get used to. Definitely takes some discipline. It's like trying to learn how to do nice handwriting. Here's the same sketch scanned and then dropped into Photoshop. took some 3D wheels that I had done and rendered in a previous rendering, a 3D rendering, just dropped them on here quickly to not have to render up paint wheels, just left the back all simple silhouette and pulled out a couple little forms, but not a time-consuming Photoshop rendering. Here's a car that looks like to be inspired by Hot Wheels on an orange roadway or plastic racetrack. It came from this sketch, which was a ballpoint pen sketch. And this is a nice example, I think, of what I was talking about earlier, whereas you tend to add a lot of things in the line drawing to make the line drawing look interesting. But when you get into the rendering, one, you realize that, where's the door and how can you open it up, and it's got all sorts of packaging problems. But aside from that, when you get into this level, you need these elements of simple form changes to rest your eye a little bit between the complex areas. And not only that, there's interesting color shifts, there's lighting, there's shadows, reflections. All of those elements take over where you relied on line work and detail here. You can rely on something else when you go to the render. So a lot of these, of course, have that same thing going on. A lot of lines added just to make things look interesting in the line drawing. I think there's one more example coming up with this little series of vans. This one is drawn with a bit more of an eye towards rendering. What I mean by that is I've just left out and showed some restraint on detailing and drawing in reflections and all those things to make it look interesting, in hopes that it would get more interesting when you go to render. Here's the line drawing for this rendering. This rendering is a bit interesting in that it has I experimented with a waterlog filter, so I did a rough render of this with the line drawing still showing. You can still see the silhouette line. Then I jumped over into the waterlog app on my iPad or phone, I don't remember which, ran a quick filter, brought it back, layered it on top of the original rendering, and probably put it on overlay or something, and started to selectively erase areas. I wanted just a hint of this looser watercolor effect, and so this was an experiment of that, mixing those two combinations together, straight up Photoshop along with this filter effect, which oftentimes can be too strong, but I like it as a quick, dirty way to add a little visual texture to an illustration. And these things have got all sorts of packaging problems, where people's legs go, all that sort of good stuff, but they're still fun shapes to draw. I would say in doing these, almost all of these are very, what I'd call the flat perspective. And what I mean is it's a very long lens camera. There's not much convergence happening off to the left or to the right. And as a result, the only thing you can rely upon to help you figure out where things go is their relative width and offset from the center. So when I'm drawing this, a lot of times what I'll do is sort of put my fingers here and just say, well, if it's a slow convergence, this offset for the track, which is the width of where the wheel centers are, is going to be relatively the same. So when I'm sketching, I find myself, I do this a lot. I just go, oh, well, that's about the same there. Here it would be just a little bit less because they're fatter tires and it's further away. So that's how I register that. And then once you set your center line, which is the distance between the centers, a lot of times I draw a little line here and then an offset here, so a little line on the inside, then find that center, then move front and back, set that. Once you set it, then you can start working your way back and set your windshield width. In this case, it's a single seater, and you set the width of that relative to the front and also relative to the distance between the wheels. So you're kind of thinking in top view while at the same time drawing and translating that into perspective. These are all, like I said, similar. This one looks to be a little bit off. I would have, if I drew this again, I think this line is a little bit too parallel to the shadow line down here. I would add a little bit of convergence on that. It's tilted down, so that's why we see the underside. It's got a little rake on it, but also this corner just feels a little bit low, or that one's a little high, take your pick. Probably leave this one alone and drop that if I did an overlay on this. More similar sort of perspectives. This one's a little bit wider lens. You can tell by the offset of the wheels. So, right, we're getting further away from our vanishing point, which is just off the page to the right here. Then just a little quick color thrown on top of it. Now a little more ballpoint pen sketches. These are some autonomous vehicles that no driver, no cockpit. These are, I'm sure, inspired by John Fry's awesome series of box art illustrations and designs he's been doing with his whole autonomous race car thing. And so that's what this is. These are inspired by his work and exploring different views and different, just really just shapes. These are a challenge to draw because you can see all of both sides for the most part. And what that means is you have to take more time in setting up your measurements and getting your foreshortening across. You can see my construction maybe in the light marker there. I moved it out to the side in order to set the wheelbase to get the foreshortening correct, because getting the foreshortening in this view is a challenge. And the way you can get it correct is you need to put out kind of an auxiliary drawing plane, which is over here. You can see there's a plane there defined with the marker, and here's one wheel. And you can see I drew a little square around that in perspective, found the center, moved that back, and then actually did the proper foreshortening to get it to go back. And then the rear wheel's a little bit larger. So once I had the right degree back there, then I just made it a little larger, brought that across, that's one cylinder, brought this one across, that's the other cylinder. And I couldn't have done this proper wheelbase calculation if it was, for instance, right here, because now here it's just a straight line. And also over here, there's not enough to see, so I can't do it over there. Center line is a bit, again, still too close to the VP. So getting out here was the place to do it. And then getting out even further made it even easier. So that's a nice example of an auxiliary, very lightweight marker construction, and then bring it across. And then I have some confidence where things are at. And then that helps me set up the overlaps, because the convergence you can see here is quite fast, because there's my vanishing point. If you don't have people, you can put holes there, so that's always fun. So there you can see there's a couple holes in these. At this time when I was doing the Inktober, I was doing a lot of motorcycles. So there's a whole raft of these really quick thumbnail sketches. I went back into Photoshop and quickly put on some wheels. So the original lines are really wiggly and loose, but then some wheels are just dropped on. It's the same set over and over, and I just adjust and move the relative size and wheelbase depending what the sketch dictated. But I wanted to see what they looked like. The next step after doing quick silhouettes of adding just base value to see the silhouette, then I might go in and pick one that I liked and start to add a bit of value change based on some usually just soft overhead lighting, or up from the upper left is pretty classic and go-to setup. Here's another one, started to define some of the surface changes. This guy a little bit, and then looks like this one was another one I was mildly interested in. It's a brush pen sketch. Again, a challenge starts with a light marker, and then you only get one shot at the line you put down with a brush pen. So again, really forces you to pre-visualize and think before you commit to the line. These are done what looks like with a high-tech or some felt tip. These are ballpoint over the top of light marker. Another one, and I'm just taking the top view and dropping it to the ground. I'm sure there's some awful interference with this little side wing here with the person's knee. It's probably intended to go under that, probably needs to come up a little bit. Again, if I was to do a final line drawing, then I would adjust all of those things. That's your chance to do that. I tend not to do it here when I'm trying to make a nice drawing. I don't want to ruin the drawing in the pursuit of a nicer design, which is really, it depends on the project or the goal of this. If I'm trying to do a nice illustration, then I let the design, it is what it is. You know, I get it. That's the first shot, and I get what I get. I'm not going to go back and change up the lines. If I'm doing a design for myself that's really about finding the design and not meant to be a beautiful drawing, then of course I tend to draw all of those corrections within one drawing or use an overlay and build up those things. And then I'll put little notes. I'll scribble out lines, I'll add notes, you know, I'll keep this line, delete that line. So it really depends, you know, what are you trying to accomplish. This one's a Gumroad demo. Again, light marker, top view drop to the ground for the shadow. Ellipses called out here, 55, 60, 70, and ballpoint pen, vanishing point, so all that good stuff. A couple of long wheelbase, funky horizontal fork pieces. Oh, some helmets, a little bit of light marker with some, looks like high-tech pen. On these, I'm not adding back any shading, so I just leave out this highlight. I think the highlight helps it look like glass. Obviously, the number one way to make something look like glass is to let us see through. So making it transparent, even if you tint it a little bit. But then again, most glass is shiny, so you add a little reflective highlight. So you just have to plan ahead for that and leave it out. Some more sort of abstract helmets, maybe sci-fi-esque, who knows. This one, I was refilling my Copic marker and this big blob of ink dropped right here, right at the end of the drawing. And I liked the drawing enough, and I was like, well, how am I going to save this? And so it meant trying to draw a little person here on top of the ink blob, working on some mechanics of the vehicle, and then a couple of rocks, of course. Maybe they high-centered a bit on those rocks and they're out there clearing them away. So, always some challenges. This one is really wide in the lens this direction, but not in the barrel going this direction. So I would say this one is like two sketches within one. Long lens for the body, short lens for the wheels. So it's definitely a bit tweaked. So what I tried to do there in that case was making this wheel turn at the front. If you like that extreme look of the degree change between the rear and front wheels, turning the wheels is a way to accomplish that without distorting your sketch too much. So you could turn this one, you know, if you turned it to the right, you would have, you could turn it to a point where it's like a perfect circle, here and here roughly, and then you could keep this one, and that gives you that illusion of a wide angle lens, which always is dramatic. But you don't have to screw up your drawing of the vehicle, right, the body, to get the look of the wide angle with the wheels. Just turn the front wheel. Some other subjects, some airships, little hover bike thing. I guess these, I don't know which, this one I guess is on Gumroad and YouTube. Actually a shape that I like quite a bit is this T bar, whether it's wide at the bottom and vertical up the center, or if it's the opposite, and the top of the T is the cabin, and then all the mechanics pull down this vertical or thinner area of the body. What I like about that is it leaves all this fun suspension work to be exposed if you go narrow on the body here. So a little bit, also still narrow, but not quite as much as this one. This one I believe is meant to be asymmetric. This part's on center, but this part extends off to the side, sort of between the wheels. It's really hard to get to see that proper offset and how much does this stick out. This could be on an angle, right, like a 45-degree angle to us, or it could be sticking way out. We don't really know in this flat perspective. That's the illusion, so you have to do some additional drawings if you want to communicate that. Also, I don't know where these people are actually sitting in this narrow cabin. I'm okay with the center person if that's the center. And then, you know, this person and way over here would be another. It's awfully wide. Maybe they have to sit sideways, these people, because there's no room for their legs directly below the window. or that's not a person, it's just something up on the dashboard, who knows. But in this early sketch, that's okay. Just looking for something interesting to develop at a later date. A couple little spaceships. Spaceships are fun because pretty easy to do something. If it looks unrealistic, then you say it's an alien ship. So those are fun to do. And it's a great time to just explore graphics and forms, and you can start to build your visual library with these little sketches. Those shapes will sink in, the graphics will sink in, and they'll be easier to recall at a later date. So I would take something like this, if I had drawn that several times. Let me just quickly backtrack. I'll try to see if I, well, this is an example here. There we go, there's a little repeating triangle truss element. There were also a couple of sketches, this one and this one. Those feel a lot like that little ship sketch here. So you can see that I'm using some of those elements that I've put into my visual library. They're coming back out. This looks a lot like the previous version of this, right? So it's a bezel, nice radius on it, and then an offset center. And here it's the same form language applied to something with wheels. And then over here, it's the same form language applied to something without wheels. I mean, this is obviously very sci-fi, so is this. So they're kind of the same, just one has wheels, one doesn't. See, I was in that rhythm. I think those pages were all done probably around the same time. Little line weight applied here to try and get this overlap. These are obviously symmetrical, one side to the other. They have a little triangle truss work here. This is on center. So what I have to do in this sort of flat perspective where these overlap, and it's hard to tell the width going back through here behind because it's hidden. I tried to set up a progression of line weight from this one in the foreground to this one in the middle to then this far away. And the way you do that is just increase the line weight where they overlap. So this one overlaps here, so make it really strong on top of that one. Then here, and then this guy fades, and you can see actually that line tapers a little bit as it goes out to the center. So I'm trying to get a progression of weight from the thing that's closest to me, and then as it goes away. I'd say this line probably got a little bit heavy for it's just a cut line or a little overlap. This is the most important overlap. So you see as it comes along from center, then it starts to get heavier because it's overlapping these wing elements on the far side. And then you can sort of let it go now a little bit lighter as it gets further away. So really pushing the overlaps, and then see even this little wing has more weight as an overlap, and even that has a little more weight to overlap this element. This front edge of that vertical rudder has more weight on top of this one, and then the bottom edge has weight to help you determine what's the bottom and the top. So wherever you have those overlaps, just hit a little bit of extra line weight, give that a try, and see if it helps to make a line drawing look more three-dimensional, right? Because we don't have value, we don't have reflections, color, shadows, we don't have any of those things to work with. So really we have our overlaps. You can see this overlaps the center fuselage, and then the fuselage here is the center line, and then this one's a little bit lighter. I didn't go back and do a lot of line work there, but you can see that just this one does pop a little bit forward. Obviously this one pops a lot forward, but I'd say it's a little too heavy, got a little sloppy there. And it has a lot of section lines to help show the form without using shadow. Just a few line drawings that have been scanned and added some value back over the top. In this case, only added value to see the silhouette because there are some interesting holes in this one, and it's really hard to see the holes in just a line drawing because the white of the paper is the white on the opaque body panels and the holes, it's the same. So the only way you really get to see the true silhouette is to just quickly throw some value on it. You could do it with marker. In this case, I just did it in the computer in Photoshop just to see the silhouettes. There were a lot of negative spaces through the legwork here of this little mech and also under the bed. Gives you a better sense of the overall proportion. instance before you spend time rendering it. This and normally this would be my first step in doing a more finished rendering anyway, is to quick set up the layers, get the silhouettes working, do a whole bunch of layers for the different, usually material types. So for instance, tires would then go on top of this body panel one, near side tires, then far side tires would probably go under it. So you set up all your overlaps, get your layer structure and your silhouettes done, and then you can start adding the value changes and shadows and reflections. Here's the original line drawing. Again, light marker construction with ballpoint. And then I scanned it, realized that the bike proportions needed to change relative to the truck. The bike was a little too large for the person I had there, so I wanted to get the cabin here correct and what looks like then a person could fit, and if that person came out, would they then fit on the bike properly? So did a little bit of observing that, a little quick measuring, went into a little overlay sketch here. So this is a Vellum sketch done over the bike to correct it and make some refinements. Made it into a bit tighter line drawing, then took that one, scanned it, put it back on top of this line drawing, and then started painting in Photoshop. So that's the result of painting and modifying this one. It's still meant to be single passenger. You can see here it's not very wide. That was kind of the rough width I used for the handlebars. This is a little bit wider, but because you need the thickness of the doors, relatively speaking, you know, it's supposed to be narrow down the center. And the reason for that is to give me all this fun stuff to play with out here on the sides for the mechanism and the suspension. So that was by design, was to make the center as narrow as possible, really just to give me the space to add a lot of fun things to see here. Another little experiment, take a little line drawing, throw some quick value on it. Here I was playing with some selective blurring and some different filter effects. Didn't spend a lot of time on that one. And then this book finishes off with some mechs. These are brush pen mechs on top of light marker. This is a very classic one that if you grew up with RoboCop, you know, Ed 209. That's the Ed 209 classic chicken leg with heavier sort of, you know, faceted orb. In this case it's a cylinder, but this is probably a little bit more Ed 209. So those are the sort of classic biped mech that I grew up with. And then the other ones are just variations on like, you know, four-leg mechs. That's this one, scanned and then painted in Photoshop. And you see I put my lighting over here in order to, again, small side is the shadow side. So shadow side here and then under. Of course, it's easy to apply value in Photoshop, so it's not as big a deal. But if I wanted to show all this mechanism with some nice drop shadows and dropping holes in there, then this is the right place for me to put my light, because it would give me those overlaps and those dark shadows. And if I drop this all into shadow, it works really well as a quick silhouette, but you have to work really hard to show form. And I knew the forms I wanted to delineate the most were in this area. So that's why the lighting was from there. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time on the character other than a silhouette, so I just dropped them into the cast shadow of the mech. And that way I can do just a real quick silhouette. And you just hit like a couple little reflections. You know, as the surface rolls away, it picks up a little bit of light from the background. So that's how you can pull out an edge if you want to, or you could just leave it all silhouette. Some more markers. This one's a little gouache sketch, gouache only. So there's no pen or pencil or anything. Marker with high-tech pen, these 2 pages. Just searching, just having fun. Some mostly bipeds, a kind of little Frogger looking quadruped. A couple more little bipeds mostly on this page. This is the last 2 pages of the sketchbook and some other things. So that's it for my sketchbook tour of a little quick look at these 2 books, mostly this book. This one's, like I said, out of print, was a giveaway for a workshop I did. I asked Design Studio Press if we had any of these still in stock. We do have some of these if you're interested, and Tinty was nice enough to send us over this discount code. So if you put in SRD 2021 as a discount code when checking out, you'll get 25% off until the end of this month on this specific book, should you want to get one. I don't believe there's that many left, so if you want one, maybe hurry. No plans to do a reprint. But anyway, thanks for listening. That was my sort of long-winded, extended sketchbook tour because I don't have an actual book in progress right now. I've been doing all these single-page sketches, and so I have a stack of sketches like I showed you a few weeks ago, which was my 2021 warm-up. I have yet to jump into a sketchbook. Maybe I'll try and do more of that and have another one of these tours ready for the end of the year. Stay safe all. Be well. Bye-bye.